This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Throughout this month, there's been renewed attention in the UK on the Blue Labour movement. The Labour faction, which dates back to around 2010 when it was developed by a group of Ed Miliband-era Labour members, challenges the pro-globalisation approach and progressive values of New Labour. It stands for greater emphasis on community, solidarity, the nation and the family, describing its socialism as both radical and conservative. In other words, it emphasises small c conservative values while advocating for left-wing economic policies that take the party back to its blue-collar, i.e. working class, roots. So in this video, we'll explain the concept of Blue Labour, why it's being revived, and crucially, whether it can compete with reform. If you want more UK political drama from us, check out our podcast Starmergeddon, where we track the successes and failures of this new Labour government. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast's YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. First though, let's take a look at the Blue Labour movement itself. After the 2010 general election, which saw Labour, then led by Gordon Brown, defeated by David Cameron's Conservatives, a group of left-leaning academics and politicians held a series of meetings in Oxford and London to discuss the future of the Labour Party. This then led to the publication of an essay series entitled The Labour Tradition and the Politics of Paradox, which is the foundation of the Blue Labour movement. In a nutshell, Blue Labour argued that, after 13 years in government from 1997 to 2010, Labour was left with an identity crisis, in that it had prioritised globalisation and consumerism without understanding that there would also be losers, specifically small towns and the working class, created in the process. This essay series explored the perceived failings of the Liberal consensus. According to Blue Labour, while the Liberal left was in charge of culture and the Liberal right was in charge of the economy, both sides overlooked the importance of the family, neighbourhoods and local communities as fundamental social bonds. As such, the group advocated for more grassroots activism, emphasis on local government and civic bodies, and a stronger relationship between capital and local areas. It criticised Labour's embracing of, quote, unregulated globalisation, as well as the individualism, or what we might now call identity politics, of progressive liberals. Blue Labour also argued that, while New Labour had been transformative in redistributing power and resources, extending democracy, and asserting the political rights of the working class, it had failed to develop an appropriate relationship between state, market and society. So who were/are Blue Labour? Well, actually, several high-profile Labour figures, including two of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's current cabinet ministers, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband and Foreign Secretary David Lammy, contributed to the series. Ed Miliband actually wrote the publication's preface, arguing that Labour needed to, quote, rediscover the tradition of Labour as a grassroots community movement, and arguing that true freedom is located in thriving communities, not individualism. But the main figure behind Blue Labour is a Labour lord, Maurice Glasman. Glasman is a controversial figure within the left, as he has previously suggested that Labour should engage with supporters of the nationalist anti-Islam English Defence League, formerly led by Tommy Robinson, which was criticised by progressives who viewed him as being overly sympathetic to the far right. He also celebrated US President Donald Trump's 2024 election victory as a multiracial, multi-ethnic, interfaith, working-class coalition against progressives, and was the only Labour Party member to be invited to Trump's inauguration last month, reportedly because Trump's now Vice President, J.D. Vance, was an admirer of Blue Labour and had sent Glasman his book back in 2016. Anyway, Glasman has kept somewhat of a low profile over the past decade, although his Blue Labour ideas are now having a resurgence. This is mainly because, on the 1st of February, it was reported that 4 Labour MPs from constituencies in the north of England, Dan Carden, the group's chair, Jonathan Hinder, Jonathan Brash and David Smith, have formed a new parliamentary group around the Blue Labour tradition, which they're trying to use to push Labour in a more socially conservative direction. Carden told Politics Home that Labour's so-called progressive politics has challenged the value of long-standing institutions, from trade unions to churches, and that those community-based institutions have been, quote, undermined and diminished. The Blue Labour MPs also claim that Starmer's Labour Party has moved in a Blue Labour direction since 2019, and earlier this month, Glasman said Starmer's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, was, quote, one of ours. So this brings us nicely onto the other reason for the Blue Labour revival, which is Starmer's attempts to win back working class voters who are increasingly turning to reform. According to this week's YouGov opinion poll, Reform remains narrowly ahead of Labour, dropping from 27% last week to 25% now. And analysis by the Focal Data polling company suggests that Reform would win far more seats from Labour than from the Conservatives on current trends. Recognising the Reform competition, last week, Starmer wrote a letter to his cabinet acknowledging that the British political establishment has ignored voters' concerns about immigration for too long. He wrote, "Our voters, our people were telling us over and over that we were wrong. That sense of an establishment that hasn't been listening is deeply felt by working people in Britain." So Labour is now trying to prove that they've got tougher on immigration and have published a series of Reform Blue branded social media posts advertising the fact that Labour hit their target of a 5-year high in migrant removals in January, claiming to have removed 16,400 people with no right to be in the UK since the general election, up 24% compared to the 12 months before. Labour have also reportedly funded adverts in Albania, depicting the UK as an undesirable destination for migrants, with Albanian interviewees referring to the cost of living crisis, crumbling infrastructure, and racial discrimination. At the same time, though, Starmer says that Labour has to show the public that the right-wing economic policies of Reform and the Conservatives, such as flat taxes or privatising the NHS, aren't the answer to migration-related issues. In this way, Starmer's Labour does seem to be moving in a more socially conservative direction, while remaining centre-left economically, hence the comparisons to Blue Labour. All in all, it's too soon to say whether the Blue Labour movement itself will become a new driving force inside Labour. It is ultimately still just a group of 4 MPs, and will be competing with other factions for influence within Labour. It's also possible, or even likely, that a new progressive caucus will spring up and make headlines trying to combat the rightward shift that Starmer's Labour is apparently undergoing. However, if Starmer is following the Blue Labour doctrine, there's 2 ways this could go. If Labour effectively communicates that it's taken voters' concerns about immigration seriously and can prove that they've slowed net migration into the UK in the next 3 years, while also convincing working-class voters that Reform's right-wing economic policies won't benefit them, then it could succeed. On the other hand, there's a risk that Labour alienates its progressive urban voter base while validating Reform's hardline approach to immigration, and then loses voters on 2 fronts. Ultimately, we'll have to wait and see whether Blue Labour grows further, and if Starmer can keep all of Labour's factions united against the rising threat of Reform. Now, the thing is, often in politics, we need to understand a wide variety of topics to truly understand what's going on. And fortunately, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, helps us do just that, with thousands of lessons in maths, science, programming, and AI. And not only that, but their interactive lessons teach you by doing, instead of just asking you to mindlessly memorize stuff. This helps you build your critical thinking skills and to become a better thinker. For instance, Brilliant's newly updated maths courses help you establish a strong foundation in algebra. It then helps you build on this, teaching you how to conquer calculus, all while maintaining an emphasis on problem solving and reasoning. The thing I like best about this, though, is that their mathematical courses help you develop your mathematical intuition and fluency, skills that you can use in the real world. As we've told you before, data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is the best way to get them. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR or click on the link in the description. And by doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.